or the Lotus Pose. I'm sitting in it right now, and the representation of the Lotus Pose, you may know the lotus flower that grows from the deepest, darkest mud, and when it's ready, it rises up to the light and it unfolds at its own pace. And this pose is very much like the representation of the lotus flower. It's not a pose that most people just easily get into. With enough practice, moving through all the muck, all the discomfort in the body, eventually maybe you'll find comfort in this pose. So let's back out of it a little bit and look at what needs to be open. You need to have some openness in the hips. And one of the beautiful things about this pose is when we sit in it, it gives us the perfect curvature of the spine to be able to sit in meditation for longer periods of time. I don't sit in my meditation in lotus because my foot always falls asleep. You may find that as well. But it's such a beautiful pose, and it really does open the hips and give you some release in the lower back. Now, if you have very tender knees, if you have really tight hips, there's so many other alternatives to get there. So let's look at some of the alternatives. You're going to begin with your legs straight out. Keep the left leg extended. You'll bring the right foot to the upper inner left thigh. Good. And then as you bring it to the upper inner left thigh, just lift your chest up and lengthen the spine. Use that as a bit of a warm-up. And then just switch. Bring the opposite leg up. You're working on externally rotating the hip. Now, if your knee is way up here, you need to stay here for a while until you can get your hips open enough to even approach the pose. You can extend the leg back out. Keep the left leg extended, and now just take the bottom of the right foot, draw it back a little bit, and lift your chest. Start to open up through the hip socket. I like to do a little mobility work first, so I just do some tiny circles in one direction, and then tiny circles in the opposite direction, just warming up, lubing up the hip joint. Hold on to the foot, I lift the chest, I stay tall in the spine, and I just draw the knee back a little bit. I'm not slumping down or slouching. And I'm staying nice and tall, starting to open up the hip socket. Now, when the hip socket's open a little bit more, I can bring the foot above the opposite knee and lift my chest. If this is still too challenging, possibly bring it onto a block and lift your chest and start to work here, opening the hip socket. And then you'll repeat on the opposite side, the same sequence, bringing it up and going through the rotation again. Same thing on the other side. And then if that doesn't work, some folks have to take the block very high, sitting up tall. So these are all options to help you get there. Still not working? There's lots of alternatives. Siddhasana, sitting with one leg in front of the other and working on getting both knees down to the ground. That still doesn't work? Sukhasana, flexing your feet, sitting cross-legged with your spine long. Still not great? Find yourself sitting cross-legged, but you're here. Grab a pillow or grab a bolster or roll up some towels. Sit up on it so that your spine goes from rounded to the natural curvature of your low back. Okay? So lots of alternatives. You can also then approach Padmasana with your hips lifted. And traditionally, at least in the Ashtanga method, the method I was taught in, it's the right foot first. You're flexing the foot. You're not sickling the ankle. It helps sometimes to lean back a little bit to get the other foot to bring it up. And then again, both feet are flexed. You sit up straight and tall. And with your hands, it's really your choice of hands. Maybe the palms up, maybe the palms down. Spine stays long, chin pulls back slightly, shoulders relaxed. In this pose, don't rush it, don't force it. I had knee surgery a few years ago from my dog Yogi pulling me down, and it took me years to get back to sit comfortably. You should never force it, never struggle into it, but work intensely, work consciously and deliberately, but without force. And if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And you can take an alternative. Padmasana, the Lotus Pose.